It was on a chilly night.
I'll go check it out.
Hearing an unnatural sound, my husband, John, took the self-defense bat and headed towards the front door. I watched quietly from the end of the hallway. What if it's some weirdo? Such thoughts crossed my mind, bringing a wave of anxiety. John deliberately cleared his throat and then asked in a clear, low voice to whoever might be outside.
Who's there?
However, no response came. Both my husband and I wondered for a moment, could it be a prank? But right after this, I heard a familiar voice, and he opened the front door.
Is that you, David?
Yeah.
David, the grandson I had been longing to see, was standing there trembling.
Here, take this blanket and some hot milk.
My husband spoke firmly as he directed David to the living room. I hadn't noticed at the dimly lit entrance, but David's clothes were tattered and worn out. It was far from the joyful reunion with my grandson I had imagined. David, what happened?
My dad says he has to go abroad for work. But they said I can't come along.
David had been picked up by a stranger while trying to remember the way to our house from his early childhood memories, and luckily made it here. I held back my tears as I hugged David tightly. I'm just glad you're safe. Really, really glad.
They say I'm a stepchild. That stepchildren get in everyone's way, so I shouldn't stay with them.
To David's soft words, my husband blurted out immediately.
Indeed, that's true. Then you'll just have to live on your own.
No, that can't be. I was stunned by my husband's unexpected words. Yet, for some reason, my husband seemed very refreshed and clear-headed. My name is Amanda Williams. This is a story from when I was in my 50s. My husband, John, was a craftsman making traditional crafts in a small rural town. Born and raised in this town, which still strongly retained its old-fashioned atmosphere, he learned only the craft of making traditional items and naturally took over his family's workshop. The encounter with my husband back then was a typical arranged marriage for the time. For me, it was the second time, but John had gone through 6 matchmaking sessions before he met me. Typically reserved and a bit difficult, which is probably why it was hard for him to find a partner. To be honest, I was somewhat uncomfortable with his difficult nature. Yet, we ended up getting married because of his earnest approach to his work and the clumsy yet kind demeanor he always showed. To support him, I quit my job and joined the workshop. At first, I made so many terrible mistakes that I only added to his workload. But now we manage the workshop together as a team. For me, who had casually gone to community college and landed a convenient job, creating crafts became a fresh and fulfilling career. We have a son named Ryan. As a child, Ryan was curious about everything. He loved exploring our workshop, spending so much time there on his days off that he practically lived there. Although John never said it outright, he had some hopes of Ryan taking over as his successor. But as times changed, Ryan became obsessed with anime and games in middle school. Naturally, he stopped paying any attention to the workshop. By the time he was in high school, he was hardly ever home, caught up with his part-time job and friends. I guess this is what they call growing up. Though I felt worried and lonely, I quietly accepted it as a part of his becoming an adult. However, it seems Ryan's feelings were a bit different from what I thought. One day, Ryan unusually invited a friend over to our home. I naturally intended to be a good host.
Leave me alone, it's annoying.
That's what Ryan told me. Still, I went ahead and prepared some drinks.
My house is such a dump, it's super uncomfortable. Plus, my dad's a craftsman, right? Too uncool, can't even tell my girlfriend. I plan to apply to a university in the city center and live on my own.
I overheard him saying this to his friends. Oh, it's not just independence. He's embarrassed by us. That's why he hardly ever comes home. Looking back, it might have been just teenage bravado. Still, knowing my son thought of us as embarrassing parents was almost enough to make me cry. Soon after, it was time for university entrance exams.
I'm going to apply to a university in the city center. I'll find what I want to do in the future and get a job, so I won't be taking over the workshop.
Ryan declared this and studied hard every day, successfully securing his place at his desired university. When we heard the news of his acceptance, my husband and I remembered feeling happier for him than we did for ourselves. But it also meant that Ryan was graduating from our home and walking his own path in life. It was a joyful occasion, but deep down, I still hoped he would take over the workshop. So on the day Ryan moved out, I ended up saying something insensitive. If it doesn't work out, you can always come back, you know. Naturally, Ryan was displeased and left saying,
Of course, it would be convenient for you if I failed and had to take over. But I have no intention of coming back.
And unless we reached out or pressed him, he wouldn't reply or show his face. Even when his graduation was confirmed and he had secured a job at an electronics manufacturer, there was no word from Ryan himself. I was the one who worried unilaterally, reaching out and sending vegetables. Ryan would only reply if he felt like it or was nudged to. This kind of relationship continued for years. A breakthrough came in Ryan's 4th year of working. He called us to a coffee shop near the station for an important discussion, where he introduced us to his fiancée, Heather. We were surprised that he had a fiancée, but even more so when Heather revealed she was pregnant with Ryan's child. It was a so-called shotgun wedding. Perhaps because we had an arranged marriage ourselves, the idea of marrying after conceiving seemed insincere to the other family, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. So we quickly set up a meeting with both families and apologized to Heather's parents, saying we apologize for getting the order wrong. We braced for complaints, but surprisingly, Heather's parents were very gracious in their dealings with our family. And Heather herself said,
I'm very happy to be blessed with a child and to be able to marry Ryan. I look forward to our future together.
My husband and I were moved by how wonderful and generous our son's wife was, and we couldn't have been more grateful. Heather had a chronic illness from childhood, and as soon as she was stable, she returned to her parents' home to give birth at a major hospital. Normally, I would learn about the well-being and condition of a daughter-in-law through my son. However, Ryan told us nothing about Heather while she was back at her parents' home. Sometimes, I tried to press him for information.
I guess she's fine.
However, Ryan seemed disinterested with his responses. I became increasingly anxious and started to have dark thoughts. That was when it started. From a certain time, we began to receive letters regularly. The sender was Heather. Kindly, Heather sent us ultrasound photos and updates from her checkups. Heather, unlike my son, who, like a high school teenager in adolescence, constantly nags at her parents, was exceptionally generous and mature. Thanks to my exchanges with Heather, I was able to focus more on my love for the soon-to-arrive grandchild than my grievances with Ryan. And so, our grandson David, who looked just like Heather with her gentle smile and inherited Ryan's intense curiosity, grew up healthily. After getting married, Ryan and Heather's new home was a newly built apartment about 4 stations away by train from our town. Since Heather's parents lived far away, I started going to their apartment to help with household chores and child care when needed. I wonder if this is what it's like to have a daughter, I mused during my peaceful and enjoyable times with Heather. Heather, saying John probably wants to see David too, often brought Ryan and David to our house. Officially, it was to visit with the grandchild, but I quickly realized the true purpose was to increase Ryan's involvement with us. Initially reluctant, Ryan began to drop by with David during breaks from work, even coming by themselves. Heather's marriage brought us more than just a lovely grandchild. It gave my husband and me a sense of hope and light. But when David was just over 2 years old, Heather suddenly passed away. We were all shaken by the sudden parting, David included. Amidst this, only Ryan remained remarkably calm. He methodically handled the funeral arrangements and cleared out Heather's belongings, then somewhat forcefully delivered her ashes to her parents' home. And within a month of Heather's passing, Ryan quickly remarried a woman named Natalie, who was 2 years younger than Heather. John was furious at Ryan's actions.
Just after Heather died, you were remarrying already. Are you kidding me? Don't you think about David's feelings at all?
It's none of Dad's business who I marry. Besides, David needs a mother. Stop meddling.
How dare you speak to your father like that? Enough. I disown you as my son. Don't ever cross our doorstep again.
Fine by me. I'm better off without such nagging parents.
This exchange was the epitome of a heated argument. Following this, Ryan again stopped all communications with us. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to blame John, because Natalie and Ryan had been involved romantically even while Heather was alive. Moreover, the reason for this was said to be Heather's absence due to giving birth back in her hometown, leaving no room for forgiveness. When Heather returned after giving birth, Ryan apparently began to frequently lie to spend time with Natalie. Particularly common were the lies about urgent work on days he visited our house.
I have work after this,
he said, even on the day he drove Heather and David. And the times he came just with David, saying,
got a call, need to step out,
and then left for 3 hours. All were lies for secret rendezvous. I never imagined that such a horrifying betrayal was unfolding behind what I thought were happy days. Even that alone would have been bad enough, but Heather had been aware of Ryan's betrayal from an early stage. She had considered divorce many times, but seemed unable to take the step, thinking of young David. We were told all this by Heather's parents after the funeral. Furthermore, Heather's parents, with tears of frustration, shared their thoughts and feelings.
Heather was exhausted because of Ryan's betrayal. That, on top of her chronic illness worsening, led to this tragedy.
Essentially, they believed that Ryan had shortened Heather's life. The content was so shocking that neither my husband nor I could find the words to respond. We did not want to believe that our son could do such atrocious things. However, given Ryan's actions, it seemed the most likely possibility. Indeed, Ryan's behavior after Heather's death was sadly efficient and smooth. As much as I hate to admit it, this is the truth. In the end, Heather's parents left us with these words before they departed.
We will no longer have any dealings with you all. We worry about our grandson, but thinking of him as the child of the man who shortened our daughter's life, we can find it in ourselves to love him. Please understand.
The deep grief they felt even extended to rejecting any involvement with their grandson, a sorrow our son had caused them, which made my heart tighten. Afterwards, I wrote to Ryan, conveying what Heather's parents had told us in a letter. Honestly, I'm not even sure what I was hoping to achieve with it. Did I want Ryan to apologize, to deny it? What exactly did I want from him? I still don't have the answer, because Ryan continued to offer no response. If Ryan won't change, then I must stop expecting anything more from myself. As I came to this conclusion, time mercilessly moved on, and eventually, we truly became estranged. Though I had resolved myself, the loneliness of not seeing my only son and the sorrow of not knowing about my grandson's growth filled me daily. Finally, unable to bear the loneliness, I secretly visited the apartment where Ryan and his family had lived, without telling my husband. But they had already moved out, and the place was vacant. I tried calling but couldn't reach him, possibly because he had changed his phone number. In desperation, I even contacted Ryan's workplace to ask for his new address, but was refused due to privacy concerns. Of course, when I thought about it calmly, that was a natural outcome. However, it seems that my call was conveyed to Ryan himself. That night, I received a call from Ryan after a long time.
Mom, look, could you stop calling my work? It's embarrassing, and my boss gives me weird looks.
I'm sorry. I was just worried because you moved and changed your number without saying anything. How is David doing?
David, well, he's fine. If you're so worried about your grandson, maybe you could send a little money.
Send money? Are you short on cash? Is that why you moved?
It's not that I'm struggling for money, but after what Dad said, and being accused by you of being cruel, it really hurt, you know. If you want to reconcile, show me some sincerity.
While his reasoning didn't sit right with me, I ultimately decided to send money for David's sake. No matter how strained the mood, worrying about one's children and grandchildren is just what parents do. At that point, I just wanted any connection, however small. I did as Ryan asked, and began depositing a fixed amount into the specified account every month. Not that it led Ryan to thank me or come visit. When I did get a call from Ryan, it was usually to say things like, "The deposit hasn't come through yet," or "I had some unexpected expenses, and it's tough, so could you send a bit more money?" Each time such calls came, I would relay to Ryan, "Is David doing okay? Can't he come to the phone? Even a photo would be fine. Please send one next time." Ryan would casually dismiss my requests with a nonchalant yeah each time. On the other hand, my husband wouldn't listen when I told him about the calls with Ryan.
I'm not getting involved at all. The money and the calls, you're handling them on your own.
And just like before, he silently immerses himself in his work. But inside, I knew he longed to see our grandson even more than I did. Frequently, I caught him sighing sadly while looking at a drawing David had made for us. How long should we keep up this distorted family relationship? But if I stop sending money, we might really lose contact altogether. Caught in a situation where I could neither move forward nor back, I agonized daily. It was a chilly night. Just as I heard the sound of a car door opening and closing near our house, it sped away. With the depopulation of our town, any car stopping was almost certainly a delivery driver. But it was strange for it to drive away so quickly. As I pondered this, I heard a weak knocking at the front door.
I'll check it out,
My husband said, taking the self-defense bat and heading to the front door. I watched quietly from the end of the hallway. What if it's someone strange? The unnatural situation spurred one bad fantasy after another in my mind. Soon, it seemed my husband had reached the front door. He deliberately cleared his throat and then asked in a clear, low voice to whoever might be outside.
Who's there?
However, no response came. Both my husband and I fought for a moment. Could it be a prank? But just after this, I heard a child's voice that seemed familiar from outside the door.
Grandpa?
Recognizing the voice, my husband threw down the bat and hurried to unlock the door.
David, is that you?
Yes.
There stood David, the grandson we had longed to see, trembling. From the back of the hallway where I had been watching everything, I was so shocked that I stood frozen. Then my husband, with a firm tone, directed me.
Hey, get a blanket and some hot milk.
Snapped back to reality by his voice, I quickly prepared what he asked for. Then I draped a blanket over David in the living room and offered him a cup of hot milk. I hadn't noticed in the dim entryway, but David's clothes were tattered and worn, and they didn't even fit properly. Moreover, it seemed like he hadn't taken a shower in a long time. A distinct foul smell lingered in the air, a constant presence. This was hardly the joyful reunion with my grandson I had longed for. David, what happened? I asked David hesitantly. He began to share his story bit by bit. In summary, this is what he said. Ryan and Natalie had recently had a child who was now 3 years old. Since Natalie became his stepmother, David had been treated coldly. This was tough enough, but it got worse after his brother was born. However, the real cruelty came later.
So, this morning, I found out our home was gone. I remembered Grandpa's house was near the Green Line train, so I walked along the tracks, and the man next door gave me a ride here.
What? Your home is gone? Was there a fire?
No, it's not that. Dad and Natalie are going overseas for work, they said. But they told me I couldn't come.
Incredibly, amidst the chaos of an overseas transfer, Ryan and Natalie had left David behind. David had walked to our house, trying to recall his early memories when a neighbor, concerned for him, brought him to our doorstep. I hugged David tightly, holding back my tears. I'm just glad you're safe. Really, really glad.
Thank you,
David said, leaning against me. As David and I calmed down a bit, my husband quietly asked him,
What would you like to do now?
After thinking it over, David answered in a small voice,
I don't know. They say I'm a stepchild. That stepchildren just get in the way and shouldn't stay.
To make a child say such things, that's beyond cruel. I was about to tell David, that's not true, when I opened my mouth. But my husband spoke before I could.
Indeed, that's true. Then, you'll just have to live on your own.
What, John? I couldn't believe the cold words directed at our grandson, who had been neglected and left behind in the U.S. David, too, looked startled as he gazed at my husband. However, my husband had a surprisingly refreshed and clear-headed expression. As I struggled to grasp his intent, my husband placed his hand gently on David's shoulder and looked at him earnestly.
What? Hey, Grandpa?
I will dedicate my life to making you strong enough to live on your own. Forget those who treated you as a nuisance.
My husband declared with conviction, and then wrapped his arm around David, pulling him into a comforting embrace. I was surprised by my husband's brief statement, characteristic of his reserved nature, but in his own way, he was conveying his determination to support David. David seemed to understand this too. He nodded repeatedly and continued to cry loudly in my husband's arms. The next day, worried about David's clearly unhealthy condition, the three of us went to the hospital. The diagnosis revealed that David had been suffering from long-term malnutrition, and he would need to be hospitalized for a while. His tattered clothes and worn-out adult sandals, considering he hadn't been properly provided with showers or meals. It was obvious that the money I had been sending had just been disappearing into Ryan's pocket. A rising tide of anger and sadness towards my naive self and my morally bankrupt son and his wife began to boil over. John.
Yeah, I know.
At this moment, our thoughts were completely aligned.
I'll go to the police. You stay by David's side.
I nodded and watched my husband's retreating back. This is for the best, I repeated to myself, trying to sever any lingering regrets. There might come a day when David, or the second grandchild I haven't met yet, might resent us. Even if that happens, I can't ignore this anymore. Not after seeing what I saw. Taking a deep breath, I went to the nurse's station to ask about buying clothes for my grandson, but I don't know his size. Meanwhile, my husband arrived at the police station and explained David's situation. He was immediately taken to a private room for a detailed interview. By the end of the day, Ryan and Natalie were suspected of neglect of a guardian's duty. Ryan's boss, upon receiving contact from the police, quickly canceled their overseas transfer and instructed them to return home.
We didn't do any such thing.
Ryan denied the allegations and refused to cancel the transfer or return home.
If you're innocent, prove it, but first, come back.
Eventually, persuaded, he reluctantly returned. Upon appearing at the police station, Ryan and Natalie consistently denied the allegations. Natalie even made confusing statements.
David hates me. He said, I'd rather live with Grandma and Grandpa than go abroad. So he left. We had no choice.
The very idea of moving abroad and leaving a 5-year-old child behind is inconceivable. I was utterly dumbfounded that they couldn't see this. The police then pressed them about the numerous bruises found on David's body. The reason my husband and I decided to go to the police was precisely because of these bruises. Leaving a child behind is never acceptable, but we didn't want to make criminals of our family members. If David hadn't had those bruises, we might have just suffered in silence. Especially me, I've been too soft on Ryan, possibly keeping everything about the money and David's situation to myself. But the shock of seeing David's bruises was enough to dispel any leniency. We can't overlook this anymore. They need to fully understand the gravity of their actions. That was our firm belief. According to the hospital's medical report, such bruises could only have been caused by repeated trauma over a long period. This repeated over a long period aspect was proof that it wasn't accidental. Naturally, both of them denied this as well.
I didn't do anything. Natalie was the one taking care of him. It's her fault.
Ryan becomes violent when he's irritated. I was actually the one trying to stop him. It's all Ryan's fault.
The blame shifting between Ryan and Natalie continued for a while, but eventually, both were found guilty and sentenced to prison. I never got to meet our second grandchild, who is now 3 years old and living with Natalie's parents. Afterward, we officially adopted David as our son, and he became part of our new family. Seeing my husband, who had always been a workaholic, take time off to play with David reminded me painfully of Ryan years ago. Yet, every time I saw David's joyful smile, I felt reassured that we made the right decision. As he grew stronger, David often helped around the house and the workshop. Both my husband and I always thanked him and reminded him, "But don't feel you have to take over the workshop." We had sworn never to impose our expectations unilaterally again. Over 15 years have passed since then. David decided on his own to become a traditional craftsman, and is now learning as my husband's foremost apprentice. His crafts are so exquisite that they have been featured in local magazines.
I'm going to inherit this workshop in the future and give Grandma and Grandpa a break,
David said, beaming with pride. I feel an indescribable happiness every day, grateful for David's healthy growth and his kindness toward us. David is clearly moving forward towards the future. We intend to continue protecting his bright eyes and smile. I hope that fewer children experience what David went through, ideally none at all. I feel strongly about it.